Welcome to all the welcomes that you've had from already your dean and from many others, and you've probably a number of you have met me. We met the other night. I'm John Shattuck. I'm the rector of CEU, and it's just an enormous pleasure to be able to start this great inauguration, which seems to me ongoing. I don't think any head of state has ever had an inauguration that went on as long as the inauguration of the School of Public Policy. So this is very exciting. And there are, of course, many people who have been responsible for this, and I thank them all again. All of you are now responsible for it. It's in your hands, in fact, you students, to create the traditions and the great moments in CEU that we will now remember 50 years from now when they say, this is what happened in the inauguration. In all seriousness, though, this is a very important enterprise, as we all know. You don't have to look more than the front pages of the papers to see the total chaos of public policy in the world today. And it's the role of the school to really begin to think about that and to address that. That doesn't mean you're going to solve all of these problems. We won't hold you responsible. On the other hand, you'll get an A+ if you do. So, please move ahead with solutions. Yeah, obviously, almost anything I could touch on would illustrate the point that I'm making. So I won't touch on any specific issues. But I said the other night, I think it was last night when we had an opening dinner with the faculty, that one of the exciting aspects about this new class is how much hope you have brought to the school. I think that even specifically was something that was said by one of the students to one of us at the event the other day, and that's something that's in very short supply in the world today. So don't lose it. We will help you keep it, and not only that, but build on it. And in the same time, you're going to be developing, and many of you already have these great analytical skills and capacities to be able to look at these problems in ways that require the world's attention. So I don't want to take much time here other than to say one more thing, and thanks very much to Wolfgang and the team that has put everything together to start this process, and to the faculty who've come here, and to the Department of Public Policy, on whose great achievements we're building this school. And of course, a number of members of that faculty will be joining the school as your professors in this even this semester, and then in the coming years. So the one thing I will leave you with is it will go back to the humorous side now that we've been serious. And there is I gave last night a little bit of advice to Wolfgang as the new dean. There's a book that I draw great inspiration from whenever I have moments like this. It's called A Guide for the Young Academic Politician. And this was written a long time ago in Oxford University by a very distinguished scholar of Plato, and a philosopher. His name was F.M. Cornford. But he'd had a lot of experience with how hidebound and conservative many universities can be, and how little progress they seem to be making. And he was referring, of course, in some ways to his own university. So there are three principles that I think are being broken by the establishment of the School of Public Policy. And let me just very, very quickly tell you what they are. I think you will recognize them. I will not read everything that's in here, but I will tell you what the principles are. The first is the principle of the wedge. Remember this. You should not act justly now or do the right thing now for fear of raising expectations that you may act still more justly in the future, or even better, expectations which you were afraid you will not have the courage later to satisfy. So that's the principle of the wedge. Then there is the principle of unripe time. Now, the principle of unripe time is that people should not do at the present moment what they think right at that moment, because the moment at which they think it right has not yet arrived. And then there is my favorite principle of all, which is the principle of the dangerous precedent. And this is the principle which, in fact, CEU, School of Public Policy, is launched to break. The principle of the dangerous precedent is that you should not now do an admittedly right action for fear that you or your equally timid successors should not have the courage to do right in some future case. It follows that nothing should ever be done for the first time. So, Wolfgang, congratulations to you.
Thank you.
All of you who are launching this. This is a very exciting moment, and thank you for listening to this set of principles that you have to bear in mind.
Thank you. To you, a very warm welcome. Warm welcome to the class of the School of Public Policy, the team, and many others of the CEU family. Come often, join us for our events. Sometimes we hold them here, sometimes we hold them over in the university. It's only a short distance from here, so I hope you come to our events and interact with us and engage us as well. It's very much in the spirit of the school to open the academic year with a serious discussion on an issue that lies very much at the heart of the mission of the school. And that is how to enable our graduate students to pursue careers during which they can make a difference for the public good. That is the essence of what we're trying to do here. And in order to help our students along the way, we intend to learn, first of all, from the experiences of other leading public policy schools around the world. And secondly, we value peer exchange in the sense of learning about the challenges and opportunities other committed individuals have encountered in their careers. And these two principles very much inform this opening roundtable today. The roundtable brings together three outstanding individuals of leading public policy schools who have pursued impressive careers in very different fields. A warm welcome to Ursula Farkas, Jeremy Barnacle, and Mathieu Lefebvre. You all have their impressive biographies in front of you. That's another principle that we break here at the school. I don't read out these long biographies. Hopefully have read them well before. I want to save time. There are more important things to talk about. But I do want to thank the three of you for accepting our invitations to discuss challenges, opportunities, and traps while pursuing a career for the public good with us today in this, as John said, very, very challenging world as far as public policy is concerned. And I'm also very glad that Austin Choi Fitzpatrick, who's a member of our founding faculty here at the school, has agreed to moderate this discussion. And so I'll hand it over to you, Austin. Thank you for doing this. And again, thank you for coming. Thank you.
I'm going to pass this microphone back and forth. Let's see if we can't get this loosened up. It's a great turnout. Good to see everybody. Can you all hear me? No?
We can, but I don't think you can at the back.
Turn it on. That's the best advice I've heard all day. Turn it on. Thank you. So we're going to use this mic, and I'll use this one. You guys can pass this one back and forth. I like the brevity of the introduction. We're going to go down. I'm going to ask a question. We'll have a 3-4 minute response. If it gets into 5 and 6 minutes, I'll start waving my arms. And so in the course of answering this question, if you could also talk a little bit more about your own career and sort of what brought you to where you are today. So the question I have, first of all, is give a thumbnail sketch of your career and then talk a bit about how you came to choose a career for the public good. So each of you have experiences in a number of sectors, and you're currently doing work that we can see here in your bios. And so you can talk a little bit about what brought you to the point that you're at today, doing work for the public good. We can start here and move down.
Great. So I'll take this one. Hi, everyone. Before I try to answer your question, so I'm Mathieu Lefebvre. I'm really honored and excited to be here, and I want to thank the university and the school for inviting me because, you know, this is entirely new, and you're breaking principles, you're inaugurating a new building, and I saw not all of your bios, but all of your pictures and where you're all from, and I was just sort of excited and felt slightly jealous that you were embarking on this new adventure. So the congratulations goes to you and to the school for launching on this. It's extremely exciting. And I hope that over the next 2 days we have the chance, or I have the chance, to learn a little bit more about you guys, because you're what really matters, not me, certainly. So let me give you, I mean, we will adhere to the principle of not reading out long bios, but I've had, since graduating from the Kennedy School of Government, now called the Harvard Kennedy School, in 2003, I worked mostly in the public sector. So I worked for the World Bank for a couple of years, mainly in Africa, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Very fun place. Then I was a political officer, a senior political officer at the UN. So I worked for the Department of Peacekeeping Operations and then the Department of Political Affairs, thankfully mainly in the field and away from New York and headquarters, which can be a bit of a jungle. I was posted to Afghanistan for 3 years, working in support of the NATO operations and the peace process in Afghanistan, with moderate success, I have to say, but it was exciting. And then I was in the Middle East for 3 years. And then I decided the entrepreneur in me, and I was really glad to see the word entrepreneur feature so prominently in the material about the school. The entrepreneur in me kind of took over, and I launched an organization 3 years ago called the New Cities Foundation. I was very excited by the rise of cities as an actor, as a political actor. And so I launched this nonprofit 3 years ago, and we work with think tanks, city governments, companies on urban innovation issues, and particularly political innovation. So I'd be delighted to talk to you more. I think there's going to be an opportunity to talk in more detail about this stuff tomorrow. But let me turn to your question. It's going to be a short answer on why I chose a career for the public good. I think I was that annoying kid who wanted to talk about apartheid and first past the post electoral systems when I was like 8. And I'm sure there are many in this room who were that annoying kid too, I have a sense. So there was no question for me that I was going to go into a career to try to improve the world in some way. I think for me the more interesting question is, how do you do that, actually? Because a lot of people have that initial intent to improve the world, but how do you actually turn that into impact? And what are the skills that you need, the decisions that you make in a place like the School of Public Policy to really do that, to turn your good intentions and your desire to talk about apartheid at the dinner table into real change. So I think when I was thinking about this talk, I was thinking about my own experience and little bits of advice, maybe, very modestly, that I can give this incoming class. So if it's okay, I'm going to just talk about that really briefly, and I'll be happy to expand on it. So starting with my own experience at the Kennedy School, I think there's 3 things that were really outstandingly good about that experience, and I hope you can replicate those things. I think the first thing, and they're all kind of intangible, which is paradoxical because in these schools you learn a lot about very technical things. I did a lot of economics, but really 10 years on, what stays with me are the more intangible things. So it's hard to kind of really grasp them and say, this is what I'm going to build. But I don't know if you agree, but it's the more abstract things that have helped me. And those things are sort of an inspiration, an energy, a confidence, a hope, as you were talking about, John, which is actually a very precious resource. And it's not that abundant in the world. And certainly I found that in my education in a public policy school, that was reinforced and built on and enhanced tremendously. And so I think the confidence, energy, inspiration, hope bundle was one of the best things that I got. The second thing is you all as a group. A community, I do not like the word network, but that's what it is. I can call, 3 or 4 members of parliament in Japan to know how they are dealing with drug issues or homelessness, and they will reply. And so that kind of connective tissue of like-minded people, this community, is something that 10 years on is really strong. It doesn't necessarily help me, cut the line in anything, but it's more of a group of like-minded people around the world that I can rely on. The third thing, very briefly, is the kind of soft skill stuff that I did. Learning how to talk in public, sort of. You should have seen me do this kind of thing before. I was terrible. I'm still pretty bad at it, but I'm much better at it. The stuff we did at the Kennedy School on leadership, which at the time I thought was completely occult and ridiculous, and now I'm like, that's exactly what you want. What does it take to be a leader? Negotiation skills. So not the more technical stuff, but the softer stuff is what so those are my 3 things: confident, the community, and these soft skills. Just really quickly, and I don't want to take too much time, but 3 areas that I think the School of Public Policy can do much better than the Kennedy School. One is exactly what you're doing now, which I think is a great idea, and I do not recall us having a chance to meet alums in the early part of their career. Let's say we met lots of senators and but it's kind of hard to relate to a senator when you're 24. I think, well, I'm probably not going to be a senator, but it's very useful, and I really encourage the school to continue this kind of thing. Not that the 3 of us can bring you that much, but it helps you understand like how you're going to start your career and what actually concrete actions you need to take to start that career. So I think preparing for the professional life was not a strength where we came from. I think the whole idea of politics 2.0, there's a lot of different ways to do public policy now. It's not just elected office. And I hope many of you will pursue elected office, but that is increasingly, at least in the countries I'm familiar with, a calling and something that you will sacrifice your life for. And there are many ways to do that. The internet and movements, I mean, I work a lot on creating movements, and that's part of this Politics 2.0, the skills for which we did not talk about at the Kennedy School. So I hope you do that here. And finally, very briefly, back to the entrepreneur's question, I did not acquire in my public policy education the very precise skill set to be a, let's say, political entrepreneur. Very mundane stuff like, budgeting, fundraising, recruitment, management of an organization. We didn't do that enough, and that toolkit, I think, was missing. So, to sum up, I think the calling was always there for me to do something good. I think I could have done a lot more to sort of enhance my ability to get things done. And 10 years on, I really think, wow, there's so much more I could have learned in those 2 years. But most of all, it was a phenomenal 2 years, and I really encourage you, and this is the main thing you have to do, is to just savor it, because it goes by very fast, and then you're in the hard world of work, and you regret. I wish I could do an MPA every 2-3 years to just, go, but you can't. So this is it for you guys.
So we're going to go around, and I'm going to ask that first question again, but you actually are the best kind of panelist because you anticipated my next 2 questions. No, it's perfect. It's perfect. No, it's perfect. So my next question is going to be actually about advice and things that perhaps were missing from a program that you were part of, and that was what you just touched on. So as we go down, if you don't mind
Sure.
reflecting on both of those.
Okay. Let me see first if people can hear me. Can you hear me? Yes? Great. Okay. So my name is Orshi, and I think I am the person in the room here who has traveled the shortest distance to be here. I'm actually Hungarian, and I work just down the street for a Dutch company on Africa, which I think is a good example of why it's so great to work in this field, because you can do very interesting things from all over the world with a lot of flexibility. But to come back to your initial question, very short background. I graduated the same year as you in 2003 from the Woodrow Wilson School, and also in public policy, of course, and started my career working in the establishment, if you will. It's at an international financial institution called the Council of Europe Development Bank, based in Paris. And we were financing social infrastructure projects, so anything from social housing to flood prevention infrastructure. And I was working on projects in my own country, so in Hungary, which was great. And then I made a big shift after 5 years and did kind of the opposite and went to work for what was pretty much a startup at the time, Triple Jump. And it's the company I'm still working for. And I think I noticed in the biography you don't actually ever say what this company does. So let me tell you very briefly now so you know what I actually do. We are a fund manager that invests in microfinance institutions around the world. I cover Africa and, since a few months ago, also Asia. And so my job is basically to look for good investees for the funds that we manage. So you'll notice that I use a lot of finance vocabulary because what we are doing is finance. It is investment, but it is also for a development purpose, for a social purpose, what people now like to call impact investing, which I can say is a very complex topic, but very interesting for that reason. And to come to the motivation a little bit, it's actually interesting. My parents are in the room and back there. And I think they've always wondered what... and my sister, sorry. Apologies. And I think they've always wondered a bit what on earth I'm doing. And maybe that's the case for several of you, because I think several of you come from countries where there's not a big history of public policy. What is public policy? You're not a business person, you're not an economist, you're not a politician, what are you? You're a bit of everything. And I think that's great. I mean, that is, I think, the great part of this job, or this field, or this vocation, if you want to call it that. For me, it started in a more prosaic way. For me, I did not know from the age of 8 that I wanted to do this kind of stuff. I don't think I talked politics at the dinner table at home. My mom's shaking her head. No. I studied business as an undergraduate and was at the beginning of my studies all set on going into business. And I do like a lot of the skills, and I think those skills you learn are very useful, which comes back a bit to what you said about careers in public policy. Because you're in public policy does not mean you shouldn't know a bit about accounting, about the law, about management, budgeting, recruiting. All of these things are very useful. At some point along the way, I realized that these skills were fine, but I was lacking, it wasn't motivating me. I wasn't interested, I wasn't fully engaged in what I wanted to do. And so somehow I stumbled on public policy and the public policy master's program, actually, at the Woodrow Wilson School, and it was an amazing experience. I can echo what you said about 2 great years that you need to take advantage of. And not just the courses, but for me, at least personally, most especially the people I was studying with, who were really interesting, coming from lots of different fields. And in terms of what stays with me, a lot of that was from what I learned from the other people in my class, several of whom are close friends still, even though they're all over the world. Some of them are in the room. We went to school together. Yes. Yeah. And to get back to the second question now about what maybe was lacking or what would have been good to have, I can just echo what Mathieu said about preparing us for the more entrepreneurial side of development of public policy. I think in the past there has been a focus on the more established, what it is like to work for the World Bank, to work for government rather than for public office, and much less so for what it is to work for a company like Triple Jump, which is really between business, normal finance and business, and the development world. And so the whole social impact investing field kind of got lost. I think I don't remember having any courses or any kind of discussion about that at the time. And I think it's a growing field and it's a really interesting field, so it is worth looking at.
Thanks. I'll apologize in advance to the students who had to listen to me for an hour and a half earlier today. So I'm going to have to pretend that I haven't already said all these things. I'll try to come up with some new material. And if my story is not straight, be gentle. The first thing I wanted to do was play soccer professionally. And as a young American of my speed, that wasn't going to work out. And so a career in public service, frankly, I never really seriously considered anything else. I've worked in government, I've worked in the private sector, I work now for an NGO, I worked as a journalist. And they've all been interesting, but there's always been a common theme, which is public service, broadly defined. In terms of bio, I worked on a congressional campaign in the U.S. I was a Peace Corps volunteer here in Hungary. I was an English teacher. So for the Hungarians out there, sziasztok, it's nice to be here again. I went home and I ran a congressional race and worked on Capitol Hill for a while. As the students I met with earlier today know, I was kind of disgusted by the scene on Capitol Hill, so I quickly moved on. I worked for the State Department in Bosnia for a couple of years, and then went back and did private sector consulting for a while, and then went and studied with Orshi, and then got to Mercy Corps. In terms of the second question about kind of what to keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier today, and both of these guys said the same thing, is there's a nice moment right now to, especially for you guys at the beginning of 2 years of study, to really dig in deep on this idea of innovation in public service, innovation, creativity, doing it differently. I think I used this line earlier, but then Orshi and I had lunch and I said it again. Of the many wonderful things that we experienced at the Woodrow Wilson School, the word innovation never was uttered. It didn't show up in a syllabus, didn't show up in a reading. And I think that the world's really changed since then, and that you guys especially have an opportunity to take advantage of that.
So one thing that each of you touched on in some way was this sense that now is a valuable time. This is a kind of a precious time. It's 2 years to do something that you can't go back and do it every 2 years, go in for these 2 years. So what is something that, with that in mind, though, if you went back for these 2 years, you have a time machine, or you have some way to pause all these other responsibilities you have and to go back and to really dig in to something like you've already done, and to do it over again, what would you sort of mine from that experience, knowing what you know now?
So going back.
Well, so I mean, one thing is like, what would you have done then differently, right? But there's an interesting. I didn't set out to ask this question, but there's this puzzle about knowing what you know now. Yeah. If you could almost workshop a series of things in a graduate program again, what might they be? Sure,
let me try. I think one thing I would think about is the sequence of the next 10 years, which is an unsolvable conundrum because you cannot think about, you can't be 10 years ahead and think back. But if I could do it, if we magically changed place right now, I would think, okay, so what is the next 10 years going to look like for me? Because I'm 10 years ahead of you, basically. We're all 10 years ahead of you. So there's a sequence of events and things that you can and can't do. So in the early part of your career, when you graduate from SPP, there's maybe two things that you could do, or certainly that I wanted to do, was, for example, field work. So, take advantage of a moment where you can, in my case, go to the other end of the world and we share that experience, because you can't do that 10 years on. If you have a family, for example, so think about when you graduate, there's opportunities that you will have that will no longer be available to you. And so focus on those. Maybe those are the ones you want to explore first. And they're very valuable. Certainly field work in many areas is very valuable and you can't replace it. later on. You can't invent field work and say, oh, I have field experience. You can't do that. So that's one. The second thing I would work on more, I don't quite know how to say it. I thought about this earlier. I called it one size does not fit all. So the idea is that you're here at a global school and you're getting sort of global skills, not linked. You're not learning about one political system, for example. You're not learning about one country. You're learning about general principles. One thing that's important is that these skills, while important, do not replace. They complement very nicely, keeping in touch with, for example, your national context. If the area you want to work on is your own country, and I hope that many of you want to go back to all of your countries and change them for the better, then I think a perfect complement to the skill set you're going to get here is staying very connected to networks, to people, to dynamics, to the news, to the media, in whatever area you want to work on, for example, in your own country. Because I kind of thought, oh, well, I'm getting a degree from Harvard. They're going to set aside a place in the government for me when I come back. And it's like, no, it's hard work and it depends on very local stuff, So somehow what you're going to learn here is great, but it only complements the reality of whatever domain you want to go work in. It could be an industry, it could be your own city, it could be a country, but sort of keep that. Don't disappear from, let's say, your own country for 2 years. Stay connected to them.
Maybe two pieces of advice or two things maybe I would have done differently. If I could go back and now I would do differently. One, during my studies, to spend more time just talking to the people in my classes, my classmates. Granted, we were in a big program with 120 people, I think, in the 2 years, so there's a wide variety of people to talk to. But it's not just the program, but we had visiting lecturers, other people from the university. We have a tendency to think that university education is about going to classes and taking notes, and there is that, but it's not just that. It's also talking to a lot of the people that you have access to. And it's that access you realize later in life when you start working in a specific field. Your access to people narrows down to that field, and you no longer have a chance of running into somebody who's studying astrophysics, which it's a great opportunity at a university, so take advantage of that. And the other thing I would say is don't do what I did. If you can, take risks. You mentioned working in the field. I would also mention working not for an established entity, but maybe for a startup in some sort of field that interests you, that you're truly passionate about. When you graduate, you don't have family ties, you don't have family responsibilities necessarily. You can take a bit more risk and do something that you are really interested in. Those are the two things.
I actually would do it just about the same as I did, which is, and I mean, how often in life does that happen? And it didn't really occur to me until I was listening to these guys. It's as much about what you did right as what you did wrong, right? And in my sense, in my experience, I really took advantage of the time to buckle down and study and learn things I didn't know, kind of content-wise. But I also always had like sort of a side deal going, because I do think to the points that these guys made, while grad school is a great chance to really focus on content and sort of scholarly activities, it's also a great chance because you've got some flexibility to build a network and to experience some things you might not otherwise have. So for example, the summer between my 2 years at Woodrow Wilson, I spent in Sierra Leone working for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission there. That's not something I was going to otherwise be able to do. It was something that the platform of the school allowed me to do. And I went, I think to the point about getting field experience, which is huge, I was as aggressive as possible. There were a lot of good reasons that I should have gone to Washington or New York or Geneva or someplace else. But I said, send me to Freetown, because that's something that I'm not going to be able to replicate. The other thing I did, and this broke all the Woodrow Wilson rules, is I had a job. I was a reporter for the Associated Press out of the Trenton Bureau, and I got hired to cover college football. And then I kind of talked my way, into other assignments, and all of a sudden I'm sitting across from Hamid Karzai, when he comes to Princeton saying, you know, do you feel like you're being received warmly here in the U.S.? And that's the Wire story about Karzai's visit to the U.S. I'm thinking, who the heck am I, right? So I think, you know, take advantage of the time, right? I mean, take advantage of the studies and the access that you have there. Take advantage of the flexibility that you have by virtue of, you know, having a little bit of flexibility with your schedule. Get to the field. I think that's great advice. But mostly, you know, work hard and take it seriously and leave no opportunity unexploited.
So these have been questions I've asked so far about you all's like experience and things you've done and things you wish you'd done. I should get in a time machine, right? But as you're sort of thinking then about what we're doing here, which is embarking on something new, if you were consulting for like a gang of folks similar to us who are trying to blue sky something, right? What sort of recommendations would you all have that are they can be in reference to your education, your experience, or something you've never seen done and have always wondered about, but just a kind of the sort of thing that tends not to be done but you think might be helpful? At a School of Public Policy. I mean, I'm just picking your brains for free right now, right? So I'm asking you to consult, and then this is the question.
I'll take it because I just made a bunch of recommendations to the dean of the Woodrow Wilson School, which she did not take. So I've actually got a pretty fresh list. You know, one thing that comes to mind is you know, when you think about the way that social change, the methods of social change are evolving. You know, the private sector is a bigger part of it. And I think people at schools like this, I mean, look at what Orshi does. People at schools like this need to start thinking more about kind of the value of the market and private sector partnerships. And yeah, I was proposing to the dean at Woodrow Wilson, you know, have you thought about things that you could do with Google? Have you thought about things that you could do with this company or that company? And you know, she wasn't hugely receptive. It's not that they never will be, but I think that's a kind of unexploited opportunity, because social change isn't just about government, and it's not just about NGOs and UN protocols and things like that. It's about working together with the private sector if what you want to do is improve people's lives. We shouldn't fear that. You know, you should see more relationships between policy schools and business schools and between policy schools and companies, not fewer.
You can tell we went to the same school, apparently.
Not known for diverse outcomes, right?
Apparently not. Okay, so now that you've heard the exciting recommendation, I'll come with a more boring one, but I think equally important. We mentioned it already, but let me just highlight it again, that the basics do matter to everybody. So for a School of Public Policy also, to let the students have a basic appreciation of accounting, of what a contract looks like, what a public procurement is. All of these things I think all of us see in our daily jobs, and we work in very different sectors, and all of us use this every single day. So I would recommend that you do, in the new imaginary public policy school, that there is a focus on the practical aspects of our future jobs.
So I completely agree with the point about the public sector. That is very important. I also could totally agree about the need to build those skills that we all use. I now run an office with 20 people. I cannot stand accounting, but I have to do it, and I know how important it is, and nobody ever taught me. I'm going to go with a slightly more abstract point. Are there techniques out there that can help each one of you in this room identify your passion point? And you have this thing called the Passion Project, which I think is great. This is completely cheesy, and I apologize. But what drives you? And I think as a person, what matters to you, each of you? It's actually very hard to find that. Some people have this, they know, I want to be the person to, change gay rights, or I want to be the person to solve the Roma question, but a lot of others kind of don't know. And I think if there's any way, any techniques out there, any academic techniques to help people think about themselves, the leadership stuff that we did certainly contributed that, but it would be extremely useful to help your graduates leave knowing what, it doesn't need to be, you know, one area, it can be one or two areas, but, you know, what do I want to do? What do I care about? That's very important.
Can I add an answer to a question you didn't ask? So it's an answer to a question you didn't ask, but Matthew's insight there prompted me. So I do a lot of hiring and people management, and one thought for you guys, and this may sound a little bit provocative, but as you're going through school, but also using school as a time to figure out kind of who you're going to be professionally, think a little bit about yourself as a brand, right? And I know that's not, you know, there's a part of that people hear that. Somebody just rolled their eyes. And I know it sounds bad, but bear with me. The people on the hiring side are trying to figure out who you are, right? They want to figure out what moves this person. What's this person passionate about? What's this person good at? What do they do, right? What's this person going to bring to my enterprise? And your story has to be clear. Now, your story may not be the right story for that job, and you may not get it, but you have to have a clear story. I see so many people who apply for stuff, and I look at it and I say, well, what do they do? Really, like, what's this person's story? You know, like, what is it that they're going to bring to the table? And to the extent that you can start molding that now, to have a vision of who you want to be and how you want to position, do it and try to be clear. And realize that there may be some opportunity cost, right? Because if you're going to define your brand as this, then it's not going to be that. But I'd rather have, you know, I think it's more powerful to have a profile that means something than be spread so thin that your identity is unclear.
I wanted to, yeah, I think that's really important because so all three of us probably are recruiters and we probably get a lot of CVs. So that's a very pragmatic question to ask is like, which CVs do you look at and which, you know, first thing is you're always overwhelmed. Like your attention can process 100 CVs and you always get 700 and you're like, well, I can't, no, that's not physically possible. So some of them have to stand out. Having a great degree is very important, but, well, okay, so you sift through the pile and you have the pile of the people who have a great degree and the others you're probably not going to look at. So how do you jump out from that other pile, I think is really, really important. And I completely agree about the brand and the storytelling, but think about that now. What are you going to do in the next 2 years that helps you define yourself and sell yourself? That's what it is. Yeah, I wanted to quickly go back to your point about what would we do differently. I think there is a real international crisis around the position of an elected official. And I think that's something that you should talk about. I mean, I work on a lot of political campaigns in the US and in France. Right now I'm working on the campaign for mayor. It's depressing. It is so incredibly depressing. Maybe I just am working for the most depressing campaigns, but I see a pattern emerging. Maybe you can complement this, but one thing we really, really need is a better system for political campaigns. And maybe in your countries it's different. I only know about two countries, which was France and the US, and believe me, it's bad. So if any of you are thinking about political office seriously, first of all, congratulations to you, and you should be nurtured, but think about how you're really going to get there, because we need new people in office, and I hope that some of you will get to elected office and will make a difference. But that's a separate track in life now. More and more, I was talking about a calling. It really is, and it's really hard. So if that's in the back of your mind, don't assume that it's going to become a reality. Work on it right now.
So this sort of leads directly into my last question, and I'm going to open up the floor for questions. We'll have a microphone floating around. So if I'm going to ask this question. We've got time to answer it fully, but just for the rest of you all, in a couple of minutes, we'll open the floor for questions. So have those in your minds. So my last question for you all was actually, what do you all look for in someone who has, let's say, 5 years of experience and then comes into a professional program? And so and this is, you sort of foreshadowed this in talking about stacks of CVs. So what, in terms of what makes a CV pop, and in terms of what sorts of experiences, skill sets, and sort of overall outlook you're looking for, what is it that you tend to see or look for the most in someone coming out with this general set of experiences? And then the second question tied to it is, and then once you hire that person and you've really got the great person for the job and you've done your job well, what are the sort of learning curve, the sort of the center of the learning curve in terms of the shift from a well-equipped person who is the right hire to the reality of doing the job? I mean, I have the same degree that you all have, and when I finished that degree, I went to work at an NGO and sat down with a budget and thought, you know, I wasn't trained to do this, right? And so you've hired the person who's right, and then, but really, realistically speaking, what is the first set of headwinds that they'll hit, just that are statistically probable, let's say? Oh, nobody leapt at that one. I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign.
Yeah. Actually, on the CV, what pops out, for me at least, we have the same problem of lots of CVs, lots of interesting profiles, backgrounds, etc. Often it's not the CV itself, it's the cover letter that goes with it, which nobody likes to write. It's really painful because you have to rewrite it for every application. You do have to rewrite it for every application because anybody who sends a general thing, we're not interested. You know, someone needs to be interested in what we specifically are offering and passionate, and show that they are passionate and interested in the field or in the job that they are applying for. Yeah? It's very simple, very difficult to put in words and into a good letter, but it makes a huge difference, I think. That I would notice at any rate, let's put it this way. Another thing, very basic, maybe difficult to acquire, but very important, is language skills. A lot of us work in different parts of the world. In my company, somebody who can speak English and French and Spanish already is great, Arabic even better, you know, but there are a lot of companies like this around. I think Mercy Corps probably is among these too, where speaking languages just opens a whole bunch of doors for you. It's very important. And of course, English, yes, but English is not enough anymore, especially if you're going to work in the field and in a lot of different developing countries. And then in terms of, once we hire, well, for my specific work, we do have, because it's finance related, it's investment related, we do look for people who know what a balance sheet looks like, things like that, but that's very different depending on what kind of job you're applying for, obviously. And then once we do have our new hires and hire them, we take them into the field immediately. So we take them on due diligence to visit microfinance institutions. My first one they took me to was in South Sudan. It was an experience. I think it was a bit of a test also to see if things would go okay. And you just have to be prepared. You'll be thrown into situations where you feel like you're unprepared because, you know, nobody knows the job, especially when you're beginning your career. The job that you fall into, you have to accept that, be open, ask a lot of questions, pester people with questions, push them to give you jobs, to give you more work, to explain, to spend time with you. And just don't be afraid if they tell you, yeah, we want you to go to this and this place and do this kind of new thing that you have never done before. Say, sure, yes, but tell me how to do it, and then go for it.
The thing that makes a CV pop to me actually has nothing to do with the CV. It's who calls on your behalf. You know, I mean, that's just the reality. Is a great predictor of someone's success is, do they have mentors? Have they, whatever they've done, it doesn't matter. I mean, it can be a professor from here. It can be somebody you had an internship with. It doesn't really matter what the role was. But did you work with somebody who was so impressed with you that they will call me and say, you know, hey, I know you through so-and-so, you know, sorry to bug you, but hey, I just want to let you know that she is terrific and you should really hire her. That goes a very long way for me. And everybody's got that, right? I mean, people will say, oh, well, you know, that really favors well-connected people. Well, the reality is if you're not very good, then having a lot of connections isn't very helpful because they know you're not very good. And there's, you know, I feel like there's definitely a code, you know, among folks. Like, I won't send somebody who I don't feel great about. you know, because my own professional reputation is on the line, right? So I'm not going to recommend to a trusted colleague somebody who I think would be a bad hire. That's just not going to happen. So I throw that in because, you know, I already said what I said about brand, you know, and I think that that's important, but the relationships and being able to operationalize those relationships is important too. Sorry.
Can you say something about the headwinds?
Yeah, so the headwinds thing, yeah, I mean, when people show up, kind of to Orshi's point, I would say I see and appreciate a little bit of like an intellectual nimbleness, I guess I would say, because the reality is, you know, you don't know the job. You don't. I don't care where you went to school, how smart you are, what you did before. When you show up on day 1, day 2, day 50 of a job, you don't really know what you're doing, right, in most cases. I'd rather you be honest about that and I be honest about that, and that you demonstrate, you know, an ability to learn fast and to be adaptable and be, you know, frankly, self-aware and self-confident that, hey, I don't get this, you know, I need a little bit of help on this, or, you know that this part is a weakness. Can you help me figure this out? I'd much prefer that. Those are the people who succeed.
Thank you. So the CV. There's 2 very mundane things, just building on what was just said about the connections and that's a great point, and you have to know how to do that. Just very basically, you need to have, when you're going to apply for jobs, you need to have 3 people that you can list and that will provide a reference like within 24 hours because they really believe in you. And so think about who those 3 people are, because if you end up at the end of your degree and think, well, I'm not sure who I'm going to list as my 3 referees, it's not good. Because the first thing I do, I don't actually read all the cover letters, I have to say, because that's a lot of work. But I do email the referees. So 1-line email saying, can you tell me about Joe Smith? The fact that people immediately reply already is a great sign. You're like, well, this is a person that is willing to take time, you know, at short notice. So get those 3 references and cultivate them. That's very important. Very silly thing, but like a basic professional skills, like writing a good email fast. If we have an interview, write a follow-up note within 24 hours saying, thank you, it was really nice to talk to you. Doesn't need to say anything, really, your follow-up note, but still do the follow-up. It's amazing how many people with extremely fancy degrees don't have those basic professional skills. So make sure to do that. In terms of more substantive things that I would look for in a CV, I always look for people who have a great ability to learn, who have a really sort of like sponges for knowledge, and you can sort of see that in a CV if you see what additional responsibilities they got, how fast, etc. So that's something. Ambition in the best sense of the word, somebody who's like hungry and went after opportunities. And the reality is, whoever you are and however charming and well qualified, nobody gets good opportunities without being extremely in your face about it. You have to go ask, knock on people's door 5 times. If I can see that come through a CV, I think that this is a person I really want. So ambition in the good sense of the word, and definitely courage, or being an original, or doing things a little bit differently, taking risks. That's very important. I am personally not so inclined to hire candidates that have a very predictable background. I like people who are a little bit different, but maybe that's just me. Headwinds. I think the basic skill there is just to break down a problem into little bits. That the ability to segment a problem and say, okay, this problem is made up of these 3 little problems, and if I can solve one, I can maybe solve number 2, and I can maybe solve number 3. Don't panic. Be rational in understanding the problem. Be transparent about it, and know how to work with your team. Don't call upon others. And I always make my new colleagues try to solve something unsolvable after 1 or 2 months, just to see how they react. And the ones who have succeeded are the ones who have not managed to solve that problem, but been very thorough about it and really done a good job in breaking it down.
Maybe we'll take that as our advice for if we have a new School of Public Policy, what should we do? And it's assign the unsolvable. So I'll see you all next Monday. I'm going to assign the unsolvable. So we now have time for some questions and answers. And so I'm going to open it up to the floor. I'm going to take maybe 3 questions at a go, compile them, and then we don't have to go all the way down with each one, but you all can sort of pick and choose. We'll do that a couple of times, and then we'll finish with any closing thoughts or observations you all may have as time permits. So questions. And then Pell Mike, who's the... Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Dustin. I'm from Canada. My question for you all is, part of the title of the roundtable discussion here is about traps. And I don't know that we've really spent a lot of time talking about what could be avoided once we finish our 2-year degree. What are some things in your experience that are just a waste of time, or maybe areas that are best avoided? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bobby and I'm from Bangladesh. I just wanted to ask, for cultures or for contexts where it seems like working in the public sector or public policy sector and contributing to it is majorly limited to the government officials, how would you suggest me and to the rest of us as young professional interested in working in the public policy to go about shaping their career?
Right, one more.
Good evening. My name is Gulnara. I'm from School of Public Policy. I'm from Kazakhstan. I wanted to ask, I think if you had such experience, but I think it's a privilege and luck if you have a chance to compose your own team. But if you came when a team has been composed and 80% of that staff is not like you, and they're not so committed and not so responsible and careless, lazy, what is your challenge?
All right, so we'll take these now, and so when I come back around, let's have some more questions. So have those in mind. So those were again traps, cultures and contexts where the public service sector is perhaps less developed than the government, and also what to do when you join complicated and possibly troublesome or politicized teams.
I'll take the traps one real quick because I think it's easy, which is, the worst trap. The worst trap is don't do a job you hate. And that sounds a little bit self-evident, but I actually am surprised at how often you find people who are like habitually working in something that makes them miserable. And the reality is, your life is your full life and your job is part of it. And it's easy, especially, this is an ambitious group of people. It's easy to sort of put your job first and put your CV first. And I think it's just very important to go with something that you feel great about. So I find that to be a trap. I mean, you find these people who are, very committed do-gooders who are miserable. And there's just no reason to do that. I have no answer for you. I'm sorry. Hopefully somebody else does. On your question, that's a tricky one. What I would say, and this is not to say that my peers at Mercy Corps are 80% lazy and whatever, but I would say that, essentially what you're talking about is how do you influence peers, right? Because if you're the boss, then you can fire people, or at least you can move them on or whatever. But you can't necessarily do that with peers. And the best thing, and this will be an unsatisfying answer probably, but you have to model behavior. You have to raise the bar and behave the way that you think is right, and show your motivation, show your initiative, show your professionalism, all those things. And the hope is that by modeling good behavior, people will come along. I mean, they'll realize either that you're rewarded, and they'll see they want to be rewarded too. If not, then you're working in the wrong place. See answer A, right? I mean, because you'll be miserable. No, not quite the way that you're. I mean, it sounds like you're presenting a pretty severe scenario, right? I mean, you're saying that 80% of your team are lazy, unmotivated, whatever. And no, I have not experienced that. Yeah. Or at least not that I'm willing to admit on camera.
Maybe to go to Gulnara's question again. Yeah, I think modeling is good, and you can try to show a good example, if you will, to your peers, but it depends on the size of the institution in question. If it's a question of 4 or 5 people around you, I think that can work. If it's a big institution, then indeed you might have to decide, it's not for me, I have to leave. You know, you cannot single-handedly, unless you're the boss maybe, but even so, it's a bit difficult. And I don't mean to be negative, we're supposed to be all positive and enthusiastic, but realistically, it is a trap. If it's a huge institution, you cannot change it yourself, then you should move on before you get, you know, you stuck, basically, in a trap. And then to come to your question, just a clarification. Do you mean how, in such a scenario, you would go into the public sector and try to change it, or to look at other options outside the public sector? I really have very limited knowledge of Bangladesh, so excuse that, and that's related to microfinance, and that's actually the example I wanted to use. If you look at BRAC, for example, there are entities that work perhaps in a specific sector, but that have a great impact due to their size or their visibility, not just locally but globally, on different areas. And it's hard to find them, but you can find them in every country, and you will have to do a much. It comes back a bit to your point about the traps. You need to not focus just on your CV, because a government job indeed will look much better in the short term, no doubt about it. It's easier to get into maybe, but probably will not make you that happy if you really want to change things.
So, traps. I think it relates to my earlier point about passion, so, and to your point, which is essential. I would add that not only do you need to avoid doing a job you hate, but really find a job you love, because the sad reality is that, you know, we have computers in our pockets now and we're working way too much, so you want to make sure that you actually really enjoyed those 10 or 11 hours you spend every day. So find your passion. I think one of the traps, certainly in this, at the Kennedy School, was that there was a path that was promoted over others. There were certain companies that were hiring, and that you thought, oh, these are the ones that we should work for. And I completely fell into that trap by going to work for the World Bank, which frankly I found mind-numbingly boring. But it was the kind of path, like you went to work for the World Bank. And it was great for other people. Lots of other people had lots of great experiences there. But for me, it was a trap because I didn't ask myself, what do I really want to do? I kind of went with the herd, and that was definitely a trap. In terms of influencing, this goes back to the point of the new politics. So in any different setting, so if you want to go back to Bangladesh and help Bangladesh, which is going through some very difficult political times, who's got influence there, and who could you realistically partner with, I think is the question. And it really is very different in every country or every political field. It seems to me like in Bangladesh you might want to actually avoid the government or the public sector, but look at the nonprofit sector, the media, but you know, where are the levers of influence? And that's very different in each country, which goes back to my point about one size does not fit all. You know, what may work in Kazakhstan would not work in Bangladesh, so think about that. Working with a team, just one very specific piece of advice, which the first time that I had a very systematic performance mechanism, like an objectives mechanism whereby every 6 months or every 3 months your boss tells you, this is what we're trying to do to change the world, this is what our team does to contribute to changing the world, and this is your role, and put it in a really nicely laid out Excel sheet. I find that helps improve teams tremendously because it tracks everybody. Everybody knows what they're working towards. And people who are not so great or perhaps even lazy, it helps. It's a very technical thing, but it helps sort of pull everybody up because everybody's working on the same sheet of music. And it's surprising to me how many organizations do not have an objectives and key results mechanism that's a smart one. So I think that's the first thing I would do.
So we can go around for one more round of questions. Here, and then here.
Good evening. I'm Ratka from the Czech Republic, and well, there is one theme which keeps popping up even from your morning lecture and now in the evening, and that's the issue of career and public policy and the family. And I feel like, especially where I come from, public policy has been for so long such a male-dominated area that, of course, the family is secondhand, but if we are at this redefining moment of public policy, shouldn't we also concentrate on redefining how to do public policy and also keep our social involvement with our family and close relatives? And yeah, what would you recommend as possible steps, how to do it and how to go around it? Thank you.
My name is Bashir Ahmed from Pakistan, and my question goes to Matthew because he worked with the UN peacebuilding forces in Afghanistan for more than 3 years. Regarding the public policy, the situation in Pakistan, both politically, economically, the interior policy and the foreign policy, and you had deal with them, I'm sure about that because you were in Afghanistan. I think that we have no policy to overcome the situation that is going on. So being an individual, what kind of policy you recommend, and like how being an individual make a difference to influence like the current policy and leads, and even if there, if like one is not able to change the situation, at least like he can direct the people toward a positive side. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Dragana. I'm from Bosnia. And I'm going to go back a little bit to the more of a technical tips and things you were talking about with the CV. And I was wondering, especially with people who don't have a lot of work experience and actually like we're able to gain those soft skills, especially now here from the school, but not in the field. What are some of the things you would recommend for us to actually gain credibility when we're applying and when we really are passionate about things and want to do them, but don't still have that credibility apart from maybe references and good schoolwork, but not the technical, not the experience in the field? Thank you.
Just on your question, internships. That's the short answer. Because I need to be able to look at your CV and say, okay, well she went to undergrad, now she's in graduate school. If there's literally nothing else, then that's the end of it, right? Unless I suppose in some organizations where they're hiring entry-level people, maybe there's some other way through tests or whatever. I don't know. But you're in a phase of life where internships are ubiquitous, and I get them. One, I'm going to give a little bit of like a wet blanket piece of advice that it pains me to say it, but I think it's probably true when I think about my own process. Orshi mentioned something earlier about, actually these guys both mentioned things about people having worked for startups and looking like risk takers and all that. And in my heart, I totally agree and I believe it. But it's also nice for me to look at your CV and see a brand name that I know. Right. So if I can look at it and say, in my business, right. So I would look at it and say, oh, well, she did something like this for Save the Children, for UNICEF, for Oxfam, whatever. That's actually pretty helpful because it's a brand name I know what their reputation is. I don't have to Google it and figure out what it is and if it's for real. I can probably email somebody I know there and say, hey, what's the story with this person? So it's not advice you probably want to hear. But, kind of erring on the side of recognizable, kind of credible brand names, say with an internship is probably smart. On your question, oh man, I mean, that is, it's really hard and I can't, if you follow the Anne-Marie Slaughter, Sheryl Sandberg debate, on this issue, there's a lot to say. And frankly, as a guy, I always want to be careful where I go on this. But I would say, far and away the majority of my close colleagues are women. Our culture is we really try to make it a place where you can have, you can have a family and you can have flexibility and things like that. We have little kids, my wife works, and the idea that you want to create, to the extent that you can control it, you want to create an atmosphere and a culture where that is a minimal obstacle, right? You know, you can't completely remove it in a lot of ways. But you know, on the government side, and especially in your country, I just can't. I don't know, because I can't say. But it's a tough one. What I would say is fight like hell. I mean, honestly, like I know it's easy for me to say, but you know, it's as a manager, it's when colleagues, and it's not so much with women and families exactly, although that's part of it, but with anybody, if there are ways that they want to structure their work life because of something, you know, about their about their personal lives, if you don't come to me and explain, hey, you know, I'd like to try it this way, here, you know, here's why, then it's never going to happen, right? So I actually, you know, I hesitate to say it in some ways to my own team, because then all of a sudden you have, you know, 20 people coming with slightly different things that they want to do, and that becomes tough. But I do think that if you don't push, it's not going to change.
I absolutely agree on your question about the internship. And just to tell you, when I got my master's degree, I had no work, or limited, a couple of internships, work experience. So I was facing that situation leaving my master's, and I started with an internship, 3 months, again 3 months, prolong, and I ended up working for the company for 5 years. So it's not impossible. I do agree with the brand name issue, this contradicting myself from like 20 minutes ago when I said, you know, take risks. I think it's a specific situation when you don't have the work experience yet. It does, I think, make sense to at least at the internship level, maybe the mid-year. I think there's a mid-year, between the 2 years, there's a summer internship possibility to do that at a brand name institution, if you will. And then the family work-life balance question, there's definitely an issue, but not, again, it depends on the country context. But for example, at my company, I think almost no one works full-time from the office. There's a lot of flexibility, but it comes from people pushing for it, asking for it, proposing things. And I know that in my team I have, of the 5 direct people working with me, 3 of them are working part-time for different reasons, men actually, to stay at home with their young children. So it's quite possible. It's doable, but they've all approached me and said, please, you know, this is what I'd like to do. And reality is that you have to be very good at your job, so your boss will say, I want to keep her even if it means she's working 80% of the time, you know?
Thank you. Yeah, being good at your job always helps. It's completely, it's actually great advice. People are not going to give you things if you're not that good. On the question of women, I completely agree with what's been said. I think I want to add on a different level. So in terms of a salaried job, I think there's still a lot of fighting to do, but there's been progress. There's been a lot of progress. I have 2 young kids, and I think that, you know, guys generally are doing more. Certainly not enough, but they're doing more, and companies also, or organizations, are doing more in the way that was said. I think where the battle lies, and I'm living this right now in the municipal elections in Paris, is politics, which tends to be conducted, at least in France, between 8 and 11 p.m. And you call a meeting and you say, oh, let's get together at 9 and, you know, write the program. And it's all guys in that room, even though half the people on the mailing list were women. Well, because they can't do that. And overwhelmingly, when there's a decision between mom and dad of, well, I've got this opportunity, who goes, it's 90% it's the guy who gets to go. So I think much more than the workplace, the issue is politics. That's where the real problem is, and that's why we're not getting to Scandinavian parity numbers in parliament, or because it's just doesn't happen like that. And the sacrifice that young women political leaders make, that I see, is huge. It's huge. It's disproportionate to men. So I don't really have an answer, but I would encourage you to start movements about this. For example, we've started a movement to move political meetings to Saturday mornings. Still not ideal, but don't do them in the evenings during the week. Do them on Saturday mornings so that women have more of a chance to participate. On your question about Pakistan, I love Pakistan. It's a great country. There's a lot of stuff you can do. I think it may seem hopeless, but what I'd like to suggest is that, because tomorrow I'm talking a little bit more about my experience in Afghanistan, etc., so maybe we can talk about that tomorrow, but I think there are green shoots, areas of hope in Pakistan, a lot, in the media, for example, in some political parties. some civic movements, a lot of NGOs are fantastic. I mean, Pakistan is blessed with a very educated, middle upper class group that other countries in that region don't have. So I think you should, my advice that goes for everybody is always look for allies. Look for groups and organizations that are doing what you want to do. Don't be alone. Credibility, just one thing that I would add is, in addition to internships, some schools offer the opportunity to work during the year. So for example, when I was an undergrad, I worked for an MP in London for a year, like 1 day a week or a couple of hours. So it wasn't like a full-time internship, but still, it adds a line to your CV. It does get you experience, and you can accelerate how fast you fill that gap in your CV by do great internships, but do stuff during the year.
Well, and to that point that I made about a network and having somebody who can call me, that's going to be your network. I mean, that guy, it's that MP that calls.
So we have time for just two more questions, and then we're going to aggregate those into quick responses and then concluding statements. So if we can do one here and one here.
Thank you very much. I'm called Pasqualino. I'm from Uganda. In Uganda, for example, we do have a very weak policy system that is currently running. You do realize that in most ministries, policy units are not operating so well. And the School of Public Policy intention is to make us actually a lot more involved in the policy systems of our country and perhaps internationally. You talked about the public service experiences you've had, perhaps at the World Bank, and you said, I quote, boring. But then we hope to make it a little different. What would you suggest that we, the new, actually, the upcoming policy analysts perhaps, or people who intend to make changes in terms of policy, should do to make it not boring, but a lot more interesting, so that then we can have policies that can operate more adequately and more properly and come up with options that are more better for the society and community and the country at large, perhaps?
Thank you. I'm Balint. I'm from Hungary, and my question would be about the recruitment process. You've mentioned that you prefer a strong brand when you look at a CV, and maybe you've said that you prefer an unpredictable CV. And my question would be, with a CV with a wide variety of internships, for example, ranging from NGO or journalism or for-profit experience, I'm talking about months or half-a-year experiences, would be seen as an asset or more like ADD?
Thank you for taking my question. My name is Rumbi. I'm from Zimbabwe. My question to the panelists, I guess to all of you, is linked to opportunities. I found that the discussion was a bit more focused on education in the West, working for INGOs in the West, but I think it's realistic to realize that there are rising countries and regions like the BRICS and China. So my question is, how would you, what are your thoughts about opportunities working in the public good in the East?
So I want to have precedent-setting punctuality here, which means that we have just about 5 minutes for this. So with apologies, if you don't mind answering it, selecting one or two, and then making some concluding comments. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be really quick. So Balint, on your question, to my point about your kind of personal brand, having a broad range of experiences, I think, is really valuable, but it needs to accrue to a common logic, right? So like my background, I'm all over the place, right? But when I tell the story of who I am and what I do, it tends to make some sense, right? So that would be it. I think it's good to have a broad range. To your point about the sort of global South and emerging powers and all that stuff, if it's any consolation, we at Mercy Corps spend a ton of time discussing that topic, right? For precisely that reason. If you look at where ideas are coming from, if you look at where capital is coming from, you know, it's all these emerging markets. Frankly, you know, the North America and Europe are largely kind of spoken for, right? And so if you're looking for opportunities for growth, for interesting ideas, you need to be looking other places. So we've actually started hiring more and more, you know, kind of headquarters type jobs, but people from other regions of the world. So I actually think that you've got a lot of leverage right now. You know, I would not, yeah, I would go to big Western institutions and position yourself as, you know, this strong, well-educated African woman who can bring them something that they don't have. And that's really valuable.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. That's something all of us are looking for quite a lot. And again, innovation comes from different, in microfinance, Kenya, mobile banking, mobile payments, it's revolutionary and it's spreading around, and it's coming from Africa, and we're working with partners in other parts of the world to learn from that, and I think that's great. To your question about the boring and the not boring in public sector jobs, this is difficult to do, but if you can, you know, I think in most governments there are pockets that are more competent, more efficient, more working, and if you can find those somewhere, it might be one unit in one specific ministry working on one specific type of projects. It's difficult for me to say in Uganda, but you can just look around and not look at the public sector as one big mass, but as a differentiated place where you can maybe find a few, maybe it depends just on a good manager who's built up a good team. So I wouldn't give up on the public sector, no?
Thank you. The point about having a diverse range of experience, or ADD, I think you're young, so you can actually try lots of things out. I completely agree about just telling the story, but this is the moment where you can, you know, go work in crazy places, and it's not going to look too weird on your CV. It's going to look like a guy who wanted to try different things. So really do that. I agree about the brand thing. I don't want to come across as the anti-brand guy. It's true. It really helps to have at least one recognizable brand on your CV. That's true. The point about East and West, I actually think that terminology is slowly fading. So if I gave the impression that I was talking about Western institutions, that was not at all my intent. I think the world, there is a community of like-minded people in every country, and certainly in the BRICS that you were talking about. That I certainly kind of take it for granted that the BRICS are at the center of this conversation. So if ever you're dealing with an institution that doesn't think, that still thinks in terms of like West versus the rest, those people are probably not the people you want to be working with, because they're working on an old model. In terms of a closing statement, I haven't really thought about how to word this, but the next 2 years in your life are going to appear fun and you know, light and enjoyable, etc. But they are extremely important, and I think the rector of CEU said it, and it's hard to understand it, but it is true. I mean, we're going through, I think what historians will look back on, a serious crisis of democracies, of institutions, of inequalities, of one versus the other. I mean, I am personally, maybe I'm getting old, but I'm not optimistic about what, let's say, the Middle East, a region I know pretty well, is going to look like for the next 20 years. I'm not so optimistic about what our democracies are going to look like in places like Hungary or Europe. So, you know, I would say enjoy these 2 years immensely, learn everything you can, but, you know, get to work, because clearly we need you guys very badly.
I would yield my time. So that concludes our program. If you don't mind joining me in thanking our panelists, but also the SPB staff and leadership who have taken all the time to put this together. If you don't mind joining me in thanking them.